Welcome to Questions of Life. I'm Cath. I'm here with Donald.
Hello.
We're also joined by a wonderful live audience. Yay. This evening we are looking at the whole subject of fear. Now, Donald, I came across a quote a few weeks ago that I want to read to you that I think just begins to launch us into this whole topic of fear. So in iNews, it said a group of leading academics have warned that COVID-19 has brought a perfect storm for people trying to manage their mental health. And there's this sense that with lockdown, with restrictions, with not being able to see people, that as a society, it's kind of brought to the surface more and more stress, anxiety, and fear. Now, we could spend a whole session, and we probably will at some point, talking about mental health and about Christian response to it and about what the Bible says. But tonight, in the whole context of fear, I think it's, again, reminded us that there are many people who are fearful in our society. Now, I want to start off by asking you, do you think we are more fearful in our society today? Or do you think we've always experienced fear, but maybe we haven't perhaps talked about it and owned it and discussed it so much?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest, in terms of previous generations. I certainly think that the last few months, fear has been more a part of life. And I think that's natural because some of the things that we thought would protect us don't. And so that's bound to make us more fearful. So it's undoubtedly true that fear is more a reality and more near the surface for lots of us because of COVID-19, because things that ordinarily wouldn't be frightening have become frightening. Things that ordinarily would protect us don't seem to protect us. So that's bound to make us more fearful. So at this point in time, we're certainly more fearful. Whether we're more fearful than previous generations, I wouldn't know. But we're more fearful than we were this time last year.
And do you think it's more widely talked about? Do you think it's out there more in the media and in people's thinking?
I'm not a great follower of the media, so
fashion.
I don't know so much. I still think there is a stigma about talking about fear. I still think it is something that we think we oughtn't feel, and something we think we oughtn't do. Whereas the reality, I believe, is that God has made us with the ability to be afraid. It's part of God's gift to us. It's an essential part of life to be afraid of certain things. And so I think that the stigma of not being able to voice or own what we're afraid of is unhelpful, because the person who is afraid of nothing is probably more ill than the rest of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always think that I've grown up in probably a family and in a society and a culture where you have the stiff upper lip. It's very Western, it's probably very British, it's a generalisation. But this sense of we're all right. When we used to meet together as a church, we'd gather and there'd be 350 people in this room, and you'd be walking through it and somebody would ask you, how you doing? And your autopilot response would be, yeah, I'm fine, thanks, how are you? You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't even think, actually, I'm not doing so great. Let me tell you about that. There is, I think, a lot of stigma. There is a lot of fear. There's what will people think of me, and a lot of rejection. And I suppose for me, I think the more we talk about it, the more we are real. And we say, do you know what? None of us are perfect. We all go through things. I think that's good. I think we have to open up the conversation and help others to open it up. So in that spirit of being real and honest, what do you get fearful of?
Lots of things. I think that there are things that, one's fearful of violence if you see somebody who's violent or threatening, all of that. So there are natural things that I think we're all afraid of. I think probably the three distinctives for me, which kind of draw out different aspects of fear, which we might want to talk about, which we can explain at some point. I am very fearful of watching people up a ladder. It really, really unnerves me, and that's because of my experience, because of things I've seen and know. So I don't cope with somebody else being up a ladder. I'm fine up the ladder. I'm fine if I'm holding the ladder, But if somebody else is up a ladder, I am very anxious, very anxious.
Scale of 1 to 10, how high would you put that anxiety?
Oh, I don't know. To me, it can range between a 9 and a...
So huge. This is
a
big.
9 and a 7, depending on how that ladder is placed
Yeah.
and how careful I think that person is being.
Yeah.
The bottom line is I've seen 2 people fall off a ladder, and also know of an extended family member who was killed by falling off a ladder. So as a child, I knew about this story of the person that fell off a ladder and died, and then I saw 2 people fall off a ladder, and the second one I thought they're going to fall off the ladder, and they did, and it's
kind of scarred you.
That has scarred me,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to learn ways of dealing with that. But it can be, I don't know what my 9 may be somebody else's 3, I don't know.
But it's a 9 to you, so that's important.
It can be, if it's really bad, it can be. I'm frightened of spiders. I do not like spiders.
Where does that come from?
I think it comes from an incident in my childhood.
Excellent, tell us.
Well, I don't know whether I invented the incident, but I seem to recall a spider coming down near me and one of my sisters screaming.
Oh, okay.
And somehow that has put in me that I should be afraid. And those kind of fears are often inherited. So we pick up the fears that our parents or somebody else had, and my parents aren't frightened of spiders, but one of my sisters, I think all my sisters are actually. So I suspect that's where it comes from, in that formative early childhood. Even if that isn't the memory, that's somehow my experience. I've inherited a fear of spiders, and it's irrational. My fear of ladders is rational, and actually the rest of the world should be as frightened as I am. My fear of spiders is completely irrational, and I know it's irrational, and I have to deal with it, but it's irrational. A much more common place of fear is that I'm fearful of letting people down. And that sometimes is a good fear. Sometimes that drives me to go the extra mile. Sometimes it's a bad fear because it forces me to do crazily, go beyond the extra mile, go the extra long way when I should have just let it go. But I am fearful of letting people down, and that sometimes I can lose sleep over that, fearful of getting it wrong, fearful of I will go through all the consequences of what could happen, and if I don't do this, what could happen to that, and the knock-on effect of this, and the knock-on effect of that, and all of that, and it'll all be my fault. And that kind of fear is a constant for me all the time. And I suspect a lot of people have similar fears, but that's a big fear for me. I used to be very afraid of... I wasn't afraid of dying until I had young kids, and then I was afraid of leaving them behind. Now that they're okay, they could survive without me. I'm not particularly frightened of dying, but I know that that's a big fear that people have, and so I've been through that and out the other side.
Fantastic.
Probably lots of other fears you could explore, but those are 3 to start us off.
It's interesting because that resonates with me, some of the things that you've talked about. I remember reflecting on my life, and I always had this paranoid fear about meningitis. It was the weirdest thing, that whenever it was mentioned that someone at university or whatever had contracted it, it used to just make me so anxious and fearful. And I'd never knowingly met anybody that had it. And then it transpires, when I was older, I worked out that my granny, when I was 3, died of meningitis. Now, I was too young to... Obviously, I know that something was going on, but that had stuck in my psyche for all of these years. And I think a lot of the fears that we have can be to do with some of the experiences that we go through. Can be through some of the things that people maybe say to us, the way that we're treated. Some of them can be to do with mental health and anxiety and other things. So there's a whole host of reasons behind why actually we can be fearful. And I suspect we've all got different fears. Everybody in this room, everybody watching would be able to list at least 2 or 3 things that actually, that's not great. So we all have fears. We don't all maybe express them and tell everybody and going around wearing a T-shirt. Although you did, I remember, tell the church that you were scared of spiders, and someone then bought you a fluffy spider and hung it on your door, didn't they? Which I thought was a lovely gift. And anybody else that'd like to send some in, that would be greatly received.
No, I occasionally do get sent spiders.
fluffy or just alive or dead?
Yeah, it's fluffy.
Great.
Or plastic.
Great.
Yeah.
I've got some ideas now. So, how do we begin to process these fears? Because you said something interesting, that your fear of people falling off a ladder is a rational fear, that actually that's something you should be fearful of. So begin to explore with us, how do we work out categories of fear, if you like? You talk about fear being a God-given gift, that there are some things we should be fearful about. Just begin to explore that with us.
Yeah, so I think it's really helpful first is to identify what we're afraid of. And sometimes fear is like a sort of blanket that comes over us and we can't actually feel or see what actually is we're afraid. We just know we're afraid.
Yeah.
And that's very unhelpful. So we need to try and identify and hone down and clarify what we're afraid of. Sometimes, in fact, often that's useful to talk with somebody and to talk it out and to express it. There's nothing worse than the fear that rattles around our brain and just ping-pongs off different bits of our skull. It doesn't come out and it gets bigger and it doesn't have any sort of focus to it. So I think we need to identify and clarify what we're afraid of. Then I tend to think that it's helpful to work out a number of, if you like, buckets to put our fear in. You imagine a row of buckets, and we want to label these buckets. So I would start off with something that's impossible. So I'm afraid of something, but it's not going to happen.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Yep.
It's completely irrational. So that's one bucket. Mm-hmm. The next bucket is I'm afraid of something, but it's very unlikely. Mm-hmm. The next bucket is I'm afraid of something, and it's possible, but it's not certain.
Yep.
And then the last bucket is I'm afraid of something, and actually I am going to have to go through that. And there's no way round it. So I've got my 4 buckets. Mm-hmm. Once I've got those 4 buckets, I would then divide them into 2 buckets each. So I've now got 8 buckets.
8 buckets.
So, and these 2 buckets are what is avoidable,
yep,
and what is not avoidable, but I can do something to help me cope with the bad experience.
Okay.
So, to end things, well, let's take a fear. Let's take my fear of spiders, for example. There is, it's not rational. Mm-hmm. A spider will, at some point, come up my arm, and you know, those of us who are frightened of spiders, it feels all goosebumpy and whatever. I can't avoid that. It is going to happen to me at some point.
Go in your ear, in your mouth.
Yeah.
I reckon the average person in their sleep eats so many spiders.
So I've got to work out how to manage that fear, and what can I do about that fear. And there are a number of strategies that you can do. Sometimes you can say, well, I just need to remind myself that it can't harm me. I need to remind myself that I'm 1,000 times bigger than it. I need to remind myself that actually it's temporary. And I think this is a big thing, is that fears are temporary. And there'll be a time when there isn't a spider. And I've just got to manage and deal with this spider, whatever it is, whether it's with a jam jar, whether it's with a rolled-up newspaper, or whether it's with a spray, or whether it's with a person that removes it, or whether it's with a clever suction thing. Whatever our method is, we have a strategy. So I don't go through life constantly thinking about spiders, because that is putting it in the wrong bucket. Mm-hmm. I've got a strategy for dealing with the spider. I now can stop thinking about it. Mm-hmm. I need to say to myself, I can't dwell on it, because I know what I'm going to do when a spider is around. I know what I'm going to do, so I don't need to think about it. Another fear might go in the bucket of really unlikely. And we would say, well, it's not going to happen, but if it does, can it be avoided? Yes, okay, so what do I do in life to make sure that never happens? Okay, I've got that strategy. Once I've got that strategy, I need to tell myself I need to move on. There's no point dwelling on it. I know what I'm going to do in the crazy event that it does happen. So with lots of those kind of tangible fears, it's working out how probable, what am I going to do, can I avoid it? If I can't avoid it, what am I going to do with it, if that makes sense? Sometimes it's helpful to recognize where that fear comes from, to know whether it's rational. Have I inherited it from somebody? Has it come from something that somebody said that was or wasn't true? So I know where my fear of people up ladders comes from, because I've seen people really badly hurt themselves. Because I know that thing, I'm gentle on myself. I don't beat myself up. I don't say there's something wrong with me, Donald. I recognise that the people who haven't had that experience won't have that fear, because other people's brains, it doesn't occur to them that person can fall off. Whereas for me, it does. That's all I can think about, is they could fall off that ladder. So I need to be gentle with myself, because it's not my fault. Equally, there's no point telling nobody ever that they can go up a ladder again. I can't stop people going up ladders. What I can do is hold the ladder myself. What I can do is make sure that somebody is holding a ladder for them. So the first time I saw somebody fall off a ladder, the ladder gently subsided to the side, and it took, for the guy on the ladder, it must have taken a long time, but you could see it and there was nothing you could do. Somebody had been holding the ladder, it would never have happened. So I have a thing, everybody needs to hold a ladder. Do not go up a ladder without somebody holding it, because even if it can go either way, it can go that way or it can go that way, somebody's holding it, doesn't happen. So I've got a strategy for dealing with it. And my third strategy is, I think most people in the staff team know that I have this fear. I will leave the room. If somebody's got to go up the ladder, I'll leave the room. I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think there's any ridicule in that.
No,
people know the stories, and I leave the room, and that's it. So it's having strategies without being without beating oneself up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose the other part of me thinks that's great if you're of sound mind and objective. And I know there have been times in my life, you'd probably say that of me now, where my mind hasn't quite been in a place where I can objectively look at those things. So I think it's always good to maybe have someone to talk with about it that actually isn't facing the same fear that you are, that can give a different perspective and look on and into it and in a different way, and can just be that calming, constant, okay, let's just objectively try and help you work out what is it that you're fearful of, and break it down with you. Because I know there have been times, particularly when I'm on my own, where fear has overcome me, where it's been a bit of a nightmare. And in those situations, I think I've really struggled, so I've not been kind on myself. I've used every name under the sun in my head. You're an idiot, you're a loser, you can't do this, you can't do that. You know, all of this stuff just comes out. And if other people knew that I couldn't do that, they'd all think, what on earth is wrong with you? And then when I bring it into the context of my faith, so there have been times when I've been fearful and I feel like I'm losing it, and I've prayed, and well, I'm still fearful. I'm still in this. God, where are you? And then you think, I'm a rubbish Christian. You know, the Bible talks about a peace that passes beyond all understanding. And there was a quote that you used last week from 1 John about perfect love casting out fear. And I think for some people that you're then in this situation of fear and thinking, am I not a Christian? Does God not love me? Is he not going to bring his peace for what I've done? You know, you go on this mental train of thought that can really destroy you. So what would you say into kind of that situation?
Definitely be gentle with oneself. Definitely recognise that any fears that are between 11 at night and 7 in the morning need to be somehow postponed until daylight.
How do you do that?
Well, I've lain awake all night. I've rolled over and rolled over and rolled over, and I just tell myself I just need to get to the morning. And I'm not saying I go back to sleep. I don't. I've lost whole nights of sleep, anxious about things. But keep telling myself this is going to look different when the sun comes up. And when the sun comes up, I'll work out my strategies. But right now, I need to somehow get over this, distract myself, get up, walk around, just be gentle with oneself. At the end of the day, if I'm going to lose a night's sleep because I'm worried about something, I'm going to lose a night's sleep because I'm worried about something. There's no point worrying about the worrying. There's no point being cross with myself. This is a natural thing. Yeah. And I think it is trying to see that the human body feels pain to tell you that, that knife is sharp or that match is hot. Fear is a human body telling you that is a danger, be careful. And therefore we shouldn't see fear as a sin or a negative thing. It's a warning either to be careful and react sensibly or to avoid something. Sometimes it's distorted and we're afraid of things that are in the wrong bucket. We're afraid of things that we don't need to be afraid of. But you shouldn't ever eliminate fear. So, for example, let's talk about the more common fear for me, which is the fear of letting people down. So one of the things that I find very difficult is confrontation, is when I need to tell somebody something I know they're going to get angry about. And that, if you're in leadership, which I am, comes with the deal. There are times when I have to tell somebody no when they want it to be yes, or I have to say that I'm not happy with the way this is being done. And that is a really difficult experience. And I fear that, and I will lose sleep over it. And I ought to fear it, because it's not an easy experience, because somebody is going to be upset. I ought to be anxious about that. But the key thing is, what is my fear going to do? If my fear causes me to bottle it, to run away, to avoid saying the truth or saying what needs to be said, then I've let fear dominate me. What I need to do is to find a way to acknowledge that I don't want to have this conversation, and to use my fears to plan and work out what I'm going to say when they say this, what I'm going to do when they are upset or angry or throw something at me. How am I going to respond? And I work out all of those things. But the next key thing for me is I focus again on what it's going to be like afterwards. That if I don't have this conversation, there's going to be all kinds of other problems. Probably other people are going to be upset with me. Other people are going to be angry with me. If I don't have this conversation, this person is not going to grow or learn. I hope that in time they're going to appreciate me having this conversation. But if they don't, I have to put sometimes the good of others before pleasing that one person. So sometimes when you're in leadership, you choose to do what is best for the vulnerable and the majority. That might not be what an individual, maybe a powerful individual, wants. So you focus on the future. What's it going to be like afterwards, whether I do or I don't? And that then becomes the motivation to go through it. You see, peace isn't the opposite of fear. You can be peaceful and afraid. Fear is to say, this is going to be unpleasant. This is going to be difficult. But I'm going to go through it because I believe it's the right thing to do. And that's when my experience is that you find God with you. It's not that I slept better that night. I still lost sleep the night before, but my experience is that in asking God to be with me, he gave me the strength, he gave me the words to say. And I've had difficult conversations, that have resulted in growth and blessing in an individual person's life. I've had difficult conversations that have resulted in conflict, that people have left the church sometimes. You can't avoid that. And then when you look in the Bible, you see that that's part of life, that conflict happens, that people sometimes do take their ball and go and play somewhere else. And I can't avoid that. So courage is not the absence of fear. It is facing the fear, planning what one can plan, focusing on what's going to be on the other side, and sometimes you just have to go through it. And the courage is moving forward when you are afraid. It is not the absence of fear. I mean, there are thousands of quotes about that, but it's absolutely true. Courage is not that you're no longer afraid. It's that you don't let the fear paralyze you or stop you. And I think that's the important thing. I'm frightened of spiders. It does not stop me going into a woodshed. It does not stop me going into the bathroom at 2 a.m. in October when they seem to always be there. It doesn't stop me doing it. And that's important, that we find the fears that need to be overcome. Equally, if I'm afraid of something, I might be frightened of driving at 90 miles an hour, then shouldn't do it. And that's a God-given fear. So there are some fears where God is saying the reason you're afraid is because you're not to do this. So don't do it. I've always been fearful of smoking. I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. Always been frightened of having lung cancer. So I don't smoke. Great. That's not a fear to be conquered. That's a fear to be embraced. I'm also, and I think I've said this in various points, I'm also fearful of gambling. I think I would be a gambling addict. I love the adventure and the excitement of who's going to win. Any race, I want to know who's going to win. I've never, ever gambled in my life because I fear the moment I start gambling, I wouldn't be able to stop. And that's a healthy fear. I'm going on to a ramble there, but you see, it's trying to identify, is this a good fear? If it is a fear of something that I need to do, how do I go through it rather than avoid it?